We are also joined by two very fantastic speakers, Ms. Huong Nguyen from the International Organization for Migration, IOM, and Mr. Chris Howe from WWF, the Worldwide Fund for Nature. So please welcome and give them a big round of applause. Thank you so much.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. So it's my honor today to be here for this session. And thanks NordCham for inviting me for this fireside chat about the just transition in practice. For me, it's very interesting because I think along the day you will hear a lot about all the environmental aspect, governance on the ESG, but very rarely we address the S part. So it's very interesting that we start with the social aspect on this forum today. And as you know that worldwide and like mentioned by Rita, Vietnam is one of the sustainable approach in terms of growth aspect. And with that, a lot of green transition is required, a lot of development in terms of innovation, in terms of the different industry and especially factories in Vietnam. But most of the time we very often forget the S part and how it impacts in terms of the global value chain, not only from the global aspect, but even within the country aspect. So it's very important that this, I would say, awareness in terms of our green transition need to be linked with the just transition, the social aspect of it. So if you look at the numbers from a study from World Bank in 2022, you can see that Vietnam is ranked 178 over 180 countries in terms of environmental performance index. So a lot of needs to be done in terms of environmental aspect. And we can see that in Vietnam, a lot of manufacturing companies in the construction industries, there are a big push and innovation to develop this green growth. But if you look on the other aspect as well, Vietnam is ranked 16 on 35 countries in South Asia region in terms of the Global Adaptation Index. And it's linked with the vulnerability of the countries, of the different organizations in terms of how they can react for the climate change. So today conversation, so what we will discuss is somehow how we need to link the just transition with the green transition. So how the social inequalities or risk can be managed with this development and environmental action that we can see, we say, in the front line. So I'm very proud today to welcome our two esteemed speakers who will deep dive on that. So my first question will be somehow to the interlink between these three aspects, because we are talking about sustainability, so it's very often economical growth, environmental impact, and social responsibility. But here I want somehow to talk about the just transition. So in terms of how it can impact the inequalities in terms of the social aspect. So maybe my first question will be for Chris, because I know that from your work at WWF, especially in the Mekong region, that you have done a lot of activities, especially on the environmental aspect. So how you can see it link with the social aspect of it, especially in terms of the livelihood of the people and communities around your project.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. You might think, why WWF on the platform? Our mission is a future where people live in harmony with nature. So it's very much about people's relationship with nature, and of course we're all about society and people. My focus within WWF is the deltas in the Asia region, and particularly the Mekong Delta. So I'm going to focus a little bit on that. And it may be a little bit distant from what you might consider construction and manufacturing, but as we've seen from Ms. Rita's presentation, agriculture is a huge part of the Vietnamese economy, and the Mekong Delta is important for that. So I'll be very quick. I can see the time ticking away. We're dependent, and Vietnam is dependent on natural resources. And in the Mekong Delta, particularly important for agriculture. But how did we get there? The delta was built by natural processes. It was built by sediment coming down the river, seasonally flooding and being deposited. It's not super complicated. It gives you a very fertile and very rich environment, particularly for food growth, but also for wildlife. If you take that process away, then the quality of your delta will decline. And if you combine that with the impacts of extraction of sand from the river, with extraction of water from the ground, and with climate change, you end up with a number of what you might reasonably call existential threats. So in a heavily populated region like the Mekong Delta, the restoration of some of those processes and the use of those resources in a sustainable way is essential if the delta is going to continue to provide the volume of food and exports that we currently see, and to grow. And then when you look at the plans for the delta and the plans for the country, with the growth of infrastructure and logistics and the growth of the economy in a green way, you don't want to undermine that by, and in fact remove it by undermining the processes that led to the delta in the first place. So, to be very quick about this, if you are going to sustain that level of social and economic and environmental quality, then our position is you need to look at restoring at least some of those natural processes, at using those resources more sustainably to allow the people who live there, the products they produce, the wildlife and the environment that goes alongside it to be sustained into the future. And that means considering how you can work with nature rather than against it. If you continue to remove the processes and remove the resources, eventually they will run out. And that has big potential consequences for the Vietnamese economy. So that's the big picture. I'll stop there.
Thanks a lot for the sharing, Chris. Maybe just to follow up on what Chris shared from Huong from the IOM, maybe if you can share from the lens of the workers, the migration aspect, the impact of this migration from the rural area to the urban area, and how this climate change impact regarding to this population who are kind of vulnerable somehow with this green transition.
Thank you very much, and my pleasure to be here today on behalf of the International Organization for Migration. And you can already see from the name of our organization, probably know what I'm going to talk about. I will be sharing about migrant workers, but I mean more broadly about the social aspects, the workforce and the people during the green transition process. So why I'm talking about migrants, we all know that migrant workforce, they contribute critical part in the construction and manufacturing. So we see from IOM, we see that more and more people move within the country, like among the provinces for work, and they work a lot in construction and manufacturing. And we also see the trend that ethnic minority migrants are joining this mobility more. And not only in the Mekong Delta, but also up in the north and throughout the country. So for migrants, we're talking, so for Vietnam, here I'm focusing more on internal migrant workers who move within the country for work. And so I think this event and also this conversation is very timely for us, because when we look at Vietnam's 2050 target, we also need to make sure that the people and affected communities are not left behind. So I think I may tend to be too social, but feel free to let me know if when the minutes that I'm getting too social. Okay, over.
Yeah, thanks a lot. We have seen a little bit about the link to explain a little background about the social aspect we hear very often. But maybe the term just transition is quite of new. We hear a lot about ESG, about all the other aspects, but the term just transition, it's kind of new for some of the people, even for people who are doing sustainability. So maybe we'll go to deep dive into the topic. So maybe if you can give a kind of simple definition from your side about what just transition means, especially in terms of practical aspect, practice, what is the step that you see, especially for Vietnam? Whoever, both of you.
Okay. Thank you. So, of course, it's an incredibly broad term and applies to many, many different aspects of society, and I'll just focus on one or two. So just to build on what I was saying at the beginning, if we think about maybe two aspects of what's going on in the Mekong Delta, the removal of seasonal flooding, which removes soil, sediment, soil fertility, stops water storage, and a number of other potential impacts which can be beneficial in the short term, but is not sustainable in the long term. And if we think about water extraction from the ground, which is prevalent in the cities and the settlements, but also for agriculture and other activities in the Delta. Now, both of those things have a serious impact in the medium term. So if we think out 20 or 30 years, water abstraction from the ground results in subsidence. So we're talking 2, 4, 6, or even more centimeters of subsidence in an area that's already low-lying over well, per year, in fact, but over a number of decades, we'll take that land down to well below sea level. And if we think about the removal of seasonal flooding, it means that within 5 or 10 years, the level of inputs, fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides, starts to rise, the costs start to go up, the soil declines and is vulnerable to saline intrusion or more vulnerable to flooding. So both cases, not sustainable in the long term without very high level of costs. So just transition would be, how can we work with seasonal flooding, take those free services that come with nature, the soil fertility, the soil height, the storage of floodwater, and work with those systems rather than trying to prevent them. So just transition would be, what crops can you grow in a naturally seasonally flooded environment? And this is not a secret. 50, 60 years ago, that was the norm in the Mekong Delta. So we could transition back to a more traditional system, still very productive, and there are a whole range of interesting and innovative products that could come for that. And if we think about water extraction from the ground, let's say in an aquaculture environment, in a shrimp farming environment, can we transition to certified systems that have more innovative ways of collecting fresh water rather than just taking it out of the aquifer and using that instead? So those are a couple examples of the kind of pathways which we might say are much more sustainable for people and nature in the long term, and that's what a transition looks like for the hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people who work in those environments in the Delta.
So for IOM, we know that the just transition is slightly different from the green transition. So for the just transition, we have to ensure that during the shift to green economy, we ensure that we maximize the positive benefits, but we also mitigate the negative consequences or negative impacts of the green transition that it has, particularly on people and communities. And so at IOM, we are not just talking about decarbonization targets, we are talking about people. So how people, particularly migrant workers, internal migrant workers, are affected throughout the process, given that they are already facing some disadvantages compared to other groups. So in practical terms, we work with government agencies at both central and local level. We work with civil society, other partners, and the private sector to protect migrant workers better, and so to ensure that currently and also in the upcoming green transition, they are having just like good working condition, good living condition, and good well-being. And yeah, so what we do, so we have partnered with brands in the construction and building materials sector, electronics, government, and footwear to do kind of risk assessment to migrant workers, to the migrant workforce. And so our findings showed that they face a significant challenge with living, also working conditions, and also social challenges with social inclusion compared to other groups of the workforce. And we see that this is not just a social issue, but it's also reputational, legal, and operational issues for businesses as well. Like especially in the context that we are working across legal jurisdiction and commitment to SDG, and especially for business that commit to responsible business practices. And so, yeah, I think that it's critical now. I think the green transition is a very much needed, critical now. But we also need to factor in that those who are already left behind in the process, we don't want to push them further out in the transition.
Yeah, thanks a lot for this definition. But as you just shared that you are working a lot with different organizations in different industry, like construction, textile, and agriculture, or that aspect. But most of the time, very often, we can see that the organization or the companies very look at themselves and they are doing very well in terms, I would say, taking care about their innovation for their people, things like that. But sometimes they have, I would say, unattended consequence linked with the global value chain or their own supply chain in terms of how they get the local workforce or laborers or communities around their operation as well. So maybe can you share a little bit from all this, I would say, hidden consequence that maybe some of the organizations are not aware when they are moving to this green transition aspect?
Yeah, I guess I start to be a lot more social now. Okay, but do stop me if I get in too much social. I think from Rita's, what Rita has just spoke about. So the potential consequences of the green transition is about job loss and the need to upskill people. But I apologize that I won't talk more about that, but I would like to deep dive into the existing inequality or the existing challenges with the workforce, especially the migrant workforce, and I think it can be applied to other disadvantaged workforce as well. So let me share the real examples of our assessment, the work that we have partnered with a major electronic brands. So we conducted an assessment, a risk assessment of the workforce. We focus on the migrant workforce in Vĩnh Phúc and Bắc Ninh, two major industrial zones in the north. And the findings showed that in one of the production line, nearly 80%, so 80%, are migrants, internal migrants. And interestingly, more than 60% of them come from ethnic minority background. And we see that a lot of them hold a short-term contract, like 1 month to 3 months, and a lot of them hold seasonal contract, which is not legal in Vietnam right now. And okay, let me look at the notes. Yeah, and also we see that they live in overcrowded living conditions, and they need to send 40% of their income home to support families. And in one of the sites that we assessed, half of the workers are outsourced. So it means that they are contracted by a third labor agencies. That means a lot for them because it means that they are excluded from the legal benefits that they should be entitled to. And this in the construction sector, it also means a lot because it's hazardous work for many of the workers. And being excluded from the legal labor benefits also, is a high risk for them. So in the green transition, when we try to reach our environment target, it's very easy that we lose sight of the people, or we allocate the resources in a way that we focus more on the green side and less on the people. And so our message is that we should be mindful of that, not to mitigate the impact it has on the workforce, particularly the most vulnerable, like migrants, ethnic minority. It can be people with disability because of occupational injuries or something like that.
Thanks a lot. And we are talking about somehow all these different impact on the migrant social aspect. But in terms of regulation, because we are somehow proud of all the Nordic companies who will share their case studies on that aspect. But we know that from the European perspective with the EU Green Deal, they have done a kind of green growth strategy with a lot of framework and regulation associated, especially to implement this green growth. So with the CSRD, CS-DD, or AUDR, or even the human rights directives. So maybe you can share from not only from the organization perspective, but how all this EU regulation can help to strengthen this just transition aspect.
Thank you. The regulatory side is not necessarily my area of expertise, but I think that anything that drives through the full value chain, all the way through to the production side, and again, I'm thinking, very much about the Mekong Delta, which is the area I work in. Of course, a lot of the food that's produced in the Delta is exported, and the conditions of that production, flow all the way through to the consumer that happens that may well be in Europe or indeed in other countries. And I think that there's an opportunity there to look all the way through to production. And I just give an example of a partnership that we're in at the moment with a very small partnership, but one which has potential for growth with a company that produces instant noodles from a flood-based crop, in this case floating rice, traditional Vietnamese variety of rice that was very common before the intensification of farming in the Delta. And this, of course, brings with it environmental benefits because it doesn't use fertilizers, herbicides, or pesticides, because the natural exchange of water, the natural seasonal flooding brings enough sediment and nutrients and natural pest control to mean that it's a highly environmentally friendly product. So that's already being sold in the European markets. So if you like, that's the flip side, that's the positive side of environmentally sustainable production. I would also just highlight the work we've done with shrimp farming in the coastal area of the Delta, where the system is modified, again, to use water exchange, rather than stopping seasonal water exchange and not using groundwater extraction. And through that became Aquaculture Stewardship Council certified, which then meets a whole load of standards for importers, in other countries, including European countries. So all the raft of legislation that you mentioned, probably the deforestation regulations, the one I'm most familiar with through the work with WWF, all drive important changes. Particularly in the case of the deforestation regulation in certain areas of Vietnam, but also in areas you might not think about, like animal feed, particularly for aquaculture or for other livestock, which has a huge deforestation footprint globally. That regulation means that you could no longer use animal feed that comes from an area that's shown to be deforested after 2020. So a lot of positive opportunities there, I would say, from these kinds of regulations.
Huong, maybe from your perspective?
Yes. So there's been increasing legislation and that holds companies accountable for both environment and social or human and labor rights issues recently, both globally and from the EU. And it can be daunting, it can be challenging for businesses at the beginning, but we believe that is important for the just transition, because like especially taking the CS jeopardy as an example, it requires company to be accountable for both aspects. It means that companies shouldn't lose sight of either the people elements or the environment. So as I said before, we may tend to focus too much on environment and we lose sight of people elements. So these kind of regulations, it will just like a wake-up call for us to really pay attention to both. And it requires a robust human rights, talking about the social aspects, it requires a robust human rights due diligence approach. So traditionally, we rely on audits. And we all know that audits has certain flaws. So in one of our assessment in partnership with a construction and building materials company, with the assessment with their suppliers in Vietnam, we found out critical issues with compulsory labor, as well as the totally lack of access to grievance mechanism, particularly for migrants and ethnic minority workers. And these findings, it never came up in the traditional audit report, although the audits were taking place quite regularly. So a robust human rights due diligence process will help. Actually, it might be challenging at the beginning, as I said, but at the end, it will help companies to proactively identify the risks that happens to people, to community, like both in terms of the human and labor rights, as well as the environmental impacts. So it helps to identify the impacts early on before companies can assess and address and also remedy in terms of violations. So it means that it helps us to be more proactive to avoid that the consequences get too late or like it might be too costly to remedy. So and also I think this increasing legislation also requires companies to look deeper into supply chains. So now with construction, we don't only care about how the construction is actually being done and how the workers in the construction are actually working. We go deeper, for example, to the materials that we source for the construction. So it can be like sand that Chris and WWF cares a lot about from the Mekong Delta, and how sand mining can impact on the communities there. Yeah. So again, challenging, but we can. It will be sustainable in the long run.
Due to the time, I need to squeeze a little bit, but because you are talking about sand mining, and we have one of the audience who are asking questions about that, so maybe relevant to you, Chris. The construction sector contributes significantly to the excessive sand mining, particularly in the Mekong Delta. Are there any alternative materials currently or in the future that you are aware of?
Yeah, it's a great question and a really important issue and has many facets. I think WWF has just concluded a 4-year project with funding from the German government in partnership with the Vietnamese government on sand mining in the Mekong Delta. First time it's been done, and of course it's highlighted the the significance of the issue, with many, many times as much sand being taken out of the river as is being deposited on an annual basis. So the first issue is the supply of sand, which is essential to the growth of the Vietnamese economy, and the tightening up of the regulations has been really important in trying to address that, the setting of a sand budget, but there's still a big gap. There's a finite amount of sand in the river. It will run out in a few years' time. So there's a big issue there. Even if it were extracted, of course, the issue you mentioned there, the erosion of the riverbanks, which causes displacement of communities, and something which is not that well known, but the deepening of the river causes a big change in the movement of the tide and significantly contributes to flooding and saline intrusion. So, as you said, one of the solutions is to look for alternatives. We have a technical report as part of our project which looks at a whole range of alternatives, but for this audience you know much better than I all of the technical constraints and qualities that you need for the use of sand. I think I would throw it back to the audience and say there's a massive, massive opportunity for innovation here, to work with a whole load of partners, and we'd be happy to talk to those who are interested, to develop alternatives to river sand, so manufactured sand from a wide variety of waste sources or other potential sources that we've not even thought of yet. It is a critical area and a huge, huge opportunity, and the answers are yet to be found, I think.
There are a lot of questions from the audience, but I will take another one for Huong. And I'm sure that along the day you will have the opportunity to meet directly with the speakers, to answer all your questions. So in terms of worker skill development, any advice that you would suggest or workforce that need to prepare and equip during the green transition?
That's a very important question, but it's also a big question. So my take is that you should first understand your workforce, understand who are at a higher risk or when you transition to the green practices. So only when you understand your workforce and understand who are at a higher risk, then you find a way to, with the solutions. So at IOM, our recommendation is that you talk to them and engage with them early on so that you understand and foresee the risks, so that you can plan for your own solution. And it cannot be a one-size-fits-all solutions, I imagine. It depends. Yeah.
Thanks a lot for your sharing. So just to wrap up and finish the session today, one, I would say, tricky question is if there are one key actions that you need to define in terms of, I would say, for the Vietnam development, in terms of how to balance this just transition with this green transition, all these different social aspect with all this environmental action that you can see, especially in terms of cross-partnership, or in terms of how it can be inclusive as much as possible, or scalable in terms of solutions. Yeah, I know it's a very tricky question, but just to wrap up, so what is your key takeaway?
I won't try and answer all of those, but I want to make two very quick points. The first thing is the environment doesn't care about this, right? The environment is the impact. And I would say that it's really important. Of course, if you reduce your, let's say, carbon emissions or water extraction or sand extraction by 50% per unit of production, but you treble your production, you're extracting more water or emitting more carbon. And so it's really important when we think about all these actions to look at the ultimate net result to the environment. Emissions have to come down. You can't just do that by unit production. The second point, which is your question, I'll pick on the scalability thing. So I've talked a little bit about production systems, a transition to production systems that work with nature and not against it. And that's not just for the environment's sake, it's for the economy, the people who live there, and the long-term existence, in fact, of the Delta. that's driven by buyers. And so if you're buying rice, you're buying shrimp, you're buying sand, whatever it is you're buying, that's the driver that will ultimately transition. No amount of aid money or grant money or pilot projects of 100 or 1,000 or even 10,000 hectares can solve that problem. The scalability has to come from large-scale shifts in buying, shifts to buying floating rice, shifts to buying shrimp that doesn't use water extraction, shifts to alternative sand sources. That's the driver that needs to move.
Okay, so from our end, obviously, again, the key message that we have tried to convey and we wanted to convey is that we shouldn't leave anyone behind in the green transition, especially those who are already at on the margin. And so in practical terms, our recommendation is that invest in a robust human rights due diligence so that you can identify the risks early on in the process. And it should be inclusive, so it should be seen through the lens of the most vulnerable groups of your workforce, and as well as the communities that are affected.
Thanks a lot. And with that, I will close the session. So thanks for your listening, and please give a round of applause to our speakers.
Thank you so very much. If I could just ask you to stay on stage for a moment. Thank you for the amazing speakers. I do want to highlight that Bao has been in the space of sustainability here in Vietnam for many years. So I'm actually going to have a question to you. You speakers have had lots of questions, so I'm going to just ask for his insights. Where we are on sustainability in the discussions we've had already this morning, what are your outlooks? Are you still optimistic?
I think we can see a worldwide kind of setback, I would say, with this US, regulation, with the EU still confusing all this new regulation. But overall, we can see that even from the regulation perspective, maybe there are setbacks, but organization-wise, all the pioneers are still moving forward. And especially in Vietnam, like Rita mentioned, Vietnam as well is moving quite fast with a lot of initiative, innovation on that regard. So I will say that it's more kind of opportunities now that we can see in terms of, so I'm quite optimistic because the ones who are already pioneer, they will continue their path because they see the value of it, the economical aspect, financial aspect of it. But as well for all the new who are starting to move on that, I would say, agenda, they see the opportunity to be compliant with their value chain, to bring additional value like the big pioneer. But the main aspect, I would say, from the big organization, because I see a lot of big organization there, is as well how you can help the value chain. Because the most important thing is, like Vietnam, I mean, 98% is SMEs. So how you can support this value chain to follow your path. So that's, I would say, the most critical aspect to really make the change, I would say, as you mentioned, to be more optimistic on that regard.
Thank you, Bao, for sharing those insights and the whole panel. Please stay one more second. I am inviting Sivat Skorn, who's our NordCham Vice Chair, to come up and show a sign of appreciation. And while he does that, we can do a round of applause again.